Hello, these lectures are devoted to vibrational waves in crystals and phonons, and we will also address the heat capacity. So in this first part we will see how far we can go with classical mechanics. So first of all, I will introduce the concept of absorption of heat by crystals, and the ultimate goal actually of this series of lectures will be to establish the heat capacity. So we will see later on the Einstein model of the heat capacity and the Debye model also. So we'll go from very simple to more complex models using classical mechanics. So first we'll see what we can do with independent oscillators, so assuming that each atom is an independent oscillator in the crystal. Then we will see the infinite chain with one atom per unit cell, infinite chain with two atoms per unit cell. We will generalize to p atoms per unit cell and 3 dimensions. And then we will address finite chains, and we will see the effects of boundary conditions. So for this course you will need to know what waves are. That's really necessary. And we will talk sometimes of the reciprocal lattice. So I encourage you to have some knowledge of diffraction. So you may have a look at my videos on reciprocal lattice and diffraction. And also if you know the description of crystals like Miller indices, how to name crystals and direction, it can help also. For this slide, the references are Kittel, the famous book, and I have mostly used Hoffman book, so it's more recent, more concise, and actually I started with some slides that are available in the website of Hoffman, and I modified them for my needs. Alright, so first of all, how solids absorb heat? So heat is energy. So how can what in a crystal can absorb heat? First of all, we can think about so crystals are made of atoms, and atoms are made of so one atom is made of a nucleus and electrons. So in case you have 3 electrons, these electrons can take some energy and accelerate, so they can store heat in the form of kinetic energy. What about the nuclei? They can move also, so they can also get some energy, and in fact they are connected to each other by bonds. Therefore they will in fact oscillate. Therefore they will behave like oscillators, and we can assume that they can absorb heat energy in the form of potential energy of the oscillator and also kinetic energy. So anyway, an oscillator energy. So they will vibrate, and actually this will lead to the concept of phonons, but we will see that later in another part. Also this will lead to the expression of the heat capacity, also in another part. And the heat capacity here is, if we take this equation, this is a typical response to an excitation linear equation. So for example, if your excitation is an increase of temperature, delta T, the response is that you can store in that crystal energy delta Q, and the constant here, so it's a linear equation, and the constant is the heat capacity. So this can be regarded as the excitation, and this the response of the solid, how much energy it can store. You can see it the other way. You could write that delta T equal delta Q divided by C. So in this case the excitation would be an amount of energy given, and absorbed by the solid, and the response would be an increase of the solid by delta t, and the constant of proportionality would be 1 divided by c in this case. Alright. We will also later on in a different part address thermal conduction. So the issue will be how does the thermal energy propagate in a crystal, and of course establish the expression of thermal conductivity. So these are the two goals, ultimate goals: heat capacity and thermal conductivity. So in this course we will go from simple theories, in particular using classical mechanics. We will keep it as simple as possible, and then we will add quantum ingredients when necessary. Alright, so we have said that heat can be absorbed by atoms, they can move. So how can they move? So their motion will be restricted by their potential energy in the potential well into which they are. So this is the potential well. Alright, and this is their position, their equilibrium position. So this is a typical bonding potential. You have the repulsive part, the attractive part, and this is the result. Alright, and you have the force is of course minus the gradient of this potential, so it has this shape. So this is generally quite complicated, but in fact we are only interested in what's going on near the equilibrium position, because the atoms will not move very far from their equilibrium positions. They will oscillate. Alright, so we should look only at what happens very close to the minimum. So what do we do in such a case where we want to look for small changes? Yeah, when we want to look at small displacements about an equilibrium position A, we take a Taylor expansion of that function. Alright, so Taylor expansion is shown here. You have so the potential energy, you have an offset here which is this position, and then you have the polynomial function. So this is the first order. So what about this number, derivative of this function here at this point? It's a minimum, therefore this is 0. The derivative here is 0. Alright, so we do not have any contribution in x, so let's go to the second order. This number is the second derivative of phi at this position. So the second derivative is in fact represents the curvature of the curve here, so we see it's not 0. Therefore this is a number, and to keep it simple we just stop at the first non-zero order, so we just neglect further orders, so we keep this one. So the force will be in fact the derivative minus the gradient of phi, therefore this will disappear, and these two will cancel with this one, and we will have this x minus a. Okay, so this is the force that is acting at close to the equilibrium. So we can call gamma this second derivative at this point, and if you look at this, we have f F equal minus gamma x. So it's a spring force, typical harmonic oscillator. So we are going to deal with a very simple, in fact, simple harmonic motion. So now we know that atoms will vibrate like oscillators. So what is the most simple model we can think of? Just assume that we just have each atom is oscillating independently. Therefore, we have just a set of independent harmonic oscillators. So what we can look for is the frequency and amplitude of the atomic vibrations. So first question will be also, what is the spring constant? It is the only unknown in this story. Alright, so let's look at first the equation of motion. So it is given by this. Solutions can be expressed in this way, with two constants of integration, an amplitude and a phase. The angular frequency of the harmonic motion is in general given by a square root of what we could call springiness, something related to the restoring force and inertia of the system. Right. And for a spring, classical spring, springiness will be given by gamma, and the inertia will be mass. Right. And of course, strong force constants will lead and light masses will give rise to high frequencies, according to this equation. So now we have to estimate the vibrational amplitude. So let's write the energy of the system. We have kinetic energy and energy of the spring. So it is written in this way, the spring and kinetic energy. And this is typically equal to half of gamma x max squared, when the kinetic energy is 0. So this is for one atom, but we have many atoms in a crystal, and the question is how the heat is absorbed by the springs. So the heat, the energy is transferred from heat to spring energy. So, and we have many of them, so we have to infer classical statistical mechanics in this case. So you know that a quantum of heat is can be represented by the kBT, okay, the Boltzmann constant multiplied by T. So what does classical statistical mechanics says? Okay, we have to look at the equipartition theorem. So it says that every generalized momentum like this one, or position coordinate like this one, which appears squared, therefore like this too, in the Hamiltonian function, or the total energy in our case, should contribute to a mean energy kBT divided by 2 to the system. So taking this into account, what is the energy, statistical energy of this system, spring plus mass? We have here two contributions, so that this is 2 times kBT divided by 2, therefore it is kBT. And now we have this equation, and we can therefore obtain the maximum amplitude of the system as a function of the temperature. So here we have temperature, we also have gamma, so we have to look for this, and we hope that this would be only a few percent of the interatomic spacing because we have anyway made the assumption that the displacement would be small. Okay, the approximation of the harmonic oscillator is based on the fact that the change in position is small. So let's see. We can try with actually with real data. If we have a gamma, we can estimate X max. So let's do that. So the first question is, how can we get a gamma? So we can get it from the Young modulus, Y. So I'm going quickly for this. Young modulus is stress over strain. Stress is given by this, strain by this. So strain is the change in length divided by original length. And of course the force. Therefore, so mixing all these equations, we get that the spring constant gamma is equal to the Young modulus by the lattice constant. So we can measure lattice constant, or we know it somehow, and we can measure the Young modulus from experiment. So let's see. These data, I took them from Hoffman slides. So with this number for Young modulus, this is a typical interatomic distance, 1 angstrom. We get 50 Newton per meter for gamma. At 300 K we get 1.3. So this is roughly 10% of the original length. So it's a bit big. It's too big, but it's not that so much big that it is out of control. So there is some validity in the assumption of classical oscillator. But of course we have to do more. So we are going to do that. Let's also look at the frequency that we obtain, because we can get it from the square root of gamma divided by m. So let's look at diamond and lead. Lead is being much heavier than diamond, than carbon. So we get these from experiments. Our calculations give these, and these are from experiment. These are from Hoffman. So only looking at the maximum values here, it's not too bad. This is roughly 10 to the 14th, so it's a factor of 2 different. And same story here, about factor of 2, so that's not too bad. There is also a good qualitative agreement. We can see that light elements and strong forces give high frequencies. Alright, so we see here that actually omega is not just fixed, it changes from 0 to some number. So there is this model of independent harmonic oscillators is much too simple. So let's do more. So now to do more we need to connect the atoms and say we don't have independent oscillators. So we can study chains of atoms connected by springs. So the springs represent the bonds. First we will see the infinite chain of one atom per unit cell. Later on we will see the infinite chain with 2 atoms per unit cell, and then the final chain of atoms. So we'll start with infinite chain with 1 atom per unit cell. So studying one-dimensional chains is still interesting for 3-dimensional solids, because you can consider that we get actually one-dimensional longitudinal or transverse vibrational waves in a crystal. So if you consider, for example, this set of planes, so actually so this set these planes here, so they are the dot. The dot are when the atoms are in the equilibrium position. Alright, so these are the 1, 0 planes, Miller indices 1, 0 in 2 dimensions. Alright, and you have, let's say they are oscillating, so only in the direction perpendicular to the planes. Alright, so all these atoms are moving in the same way. All the atoms of the plane, so all the planes are changing, oscillating. There are some indices here, so this is S plus 1, S plus 2, etc. So this actually US has not moved. This plane is still at the equilibrium. This one has moved by US plus 1 in this direction, US plus 2. So U represents the displacement of each plane. Alright, so it can be moving on the opposite way, for example here. And if you plot actually the UN of X would be this direction, you would find a sine wave, for example. So you could say that these changes, and they change with time, they can be represented by waves, plane waves in this case. And here K would be the wave vector of this wave. So this is the example of a longitudinal wave. So the atoms move in the same direction as the direction of the wave propagation. In fact, here the crystal direction is also 1, 0. Okay, so let's see now another example with a transverse wave. Here we have a transverse wave, so we have the same planes, but now the atoms are moving in the direction perpendicular to the wave propagation direction. Alright, so here we have US is here, so these atoms have moved up there, US plus 1 here, etc. So here you can see with transverse wave it's easy to see that you can have a kind of sine wave. So it would be like this and continuing like that. So it makes some sense still to look at 1D systems, because anyway any 3D can be the superposition of 1D waves, plane waves, in different directions, right? Alright, so let's do the calculations for this system, infinite one-dimensional chain. This is the index n minus 1, n plus 1. So the distance, so at equilibrium the distance is a, but in this situation, for example, this distance will be a plus, so plus the displacement of this one. So this one will have moved like that, minus the displacement of this one. Alright. And here, same a plus un minus 1. So now the question is, focusing on this atom n, what is the effect of atom n plus p on atom n? What is the force between atom n and atom n plus p? Assuming still this kind of harmonic oscillators, we can write that this force is equal to minus kx as usual. So C will be the coupling in some sense of n and n plus p between the atom n and atom n plus p, so we call it Cp, and the delta x, so the distance, the displacement. Okay, so the change of distance between atom n and atom n plus p. So it will be so you will have the same thing. So you will have the displacement will be that the displacement of atom n plus p minus the displacement of an atom n. Okay, the A disappears Alright, so this is our force. So now what about the total force on atom n? We just sum all the contribution of all the other atoms. Okay, so the force on atom n from all the other atoms are just the sum. So from p equal minus infinity to infinity, because our chain is infinite, of all the CP's un plus p minus un. And so because this is a symmetric system, we have Cp equal C minus P, and what we have to solve is Newton's law, which is in fact this. Okay, the A's always disappear, okay, because only the displacement in the end stays in the equation. So that's not really easy. So let's see what we can do. So solving this equation is difficult, so we can try to make an additional approximation. So in fact, what do you think is the effect of an atom very far away on atom n? If p is large, then the effect will be negligible. So we can neglect a large number of atoms, so just look at the nearest neighbors. And the boldest approximation you can think of is just take the nearest neighbors. Okay, so that's what we are going to do. Just look at the nearest interactions only. So in this case, we just have atom n, and we just look at the interaction with atom n plus 1 and atom n plus minus 1. So the equation of motion becomes this. Very simple. So we can rearrange because un is here and here. This is what we get. So, and we have to solve for the un. So again, this is not a very easy thing to do. But now, if you look at this term, so if you are familiar with finite element analysis, you may recognize what this is. You have here some differences between un and un minus plus 1 and un and un minus 1. Okay, so in fact, this term is a second derivative of un with this constant. So this is in fact what you would do if you had an equation, a second derivative like this, and you would like to program it to solve using programming using finite element analysis. So you have to discretize your system, so create a mesh of x, so macroscopic delta x. Alright, so in this case you use the definition of the derivative. So what is the definition of derivative? So df dx, derivative of f, is equal to the limit when delta x tends to 0 of f of x plus delta x minus f of x divided by delta x. So this is exactly what we get here. If we get the position, we take the position, so the derivative of the displacement will be the displacement at n plus 1, the position, let's say, at n plus 1, minus the position at n, and divided by the distance, which is a. Okay, so you will get something like un plus 1 minus un. The a will disappear. You can check that. So un plus 1 minus un divided by a. this will give you your finite element version of the first derivative. So now here is the second derivative, so you take that first derivative and you do the same. You take that first derivative at n plus 1 minus that first derivative at n, and you will find this, and you will have to divide again by a, so you will have an a squared showing up here. So you can check that by yourself, convince yourself it's true. Alright, so it means we can replace this by this, and we get the wave equation in the continuum limit. Alright, so because here we do the reverse process, we start from discretized version of the equation to a continuum equation. Okay, so it's a continuum limit. It means that the distance a is small compared to the wavelengths of these waves. Alright, so so this term here gives you the wave speed. So it's a square root of gamma divided by m. Alright, so we know we have waves. So what are the solutions of the wave equation? So usually we write the solution as plane waves. At least these are solutions with kx minus omega t. One thing is that we are interested in the discrete equation. X is only defined at the atom sites at Na. Okay, at the positions Na. Therefore, we should replace this x by Na. Okay, and these are our solutions. So these are the displacements, and this is the maximum displacement. Alright, so it is very important, we will come back to that the waves are defined only at actual lattice sites. Okay, we do not need to know what's going on in between the sites. Alright, so we can put these solutions back in the wave equation and see in this equation and see what we get. So as okay, you can look at this. It's very simple maths, and we get a relationship between omega and k. So we can write it like this. So it's better to have it written like this. So just a simple sine wave. And this is called the dispersion relation. So it's how k is related to omega. This is an important concept. It is used in many for all kind of quasi-particles in solids. Alright, this is a graph of this dispersion relation. So it's periodic, and you can see that the periodicity is in fact that of the reciprocal lattice. The direct lattice has a lattice constant A, and you see that the periodicity here is 2 pi over A, which is the sites of the reciprocal lattice in one dimension. So it's quite interesting. We have the periodicity of the reciprocal lattice. And these maxima are halfway between two lattice reciprocal lattice points. What do they represent? So if you remember, you have studied diffraction, or you know what the reciprocal lattice is. These are the Brillouin zone boundary. So we'll come back to this a bit later. So these are indeed the Brillouin zone boundaries. So something special is happening at these boundaries. Let's come back to this slide where we were looking at the frequency and comparing with experimental data. So in the experimental data, we had noticed that omega was changing from 0 to some value. And now we understand this. In this model, we do have a variation of omega. So we have progressed. Let's now shortly discuss the dispersion relation. So here we have established for a 1D chain that we have this relationship between k and omega, and these are periodic functions like this. So this is another example, a quantum mechanical free particle. So we have E of k given by its h bar omega, and it is h bar squared k squared divided by 2m. This is the kinetic energy for a quantum particle. So you see that here we have no periodicity and a parabolic relationship between omega and k. Okay. So here is just to mention the Vg is the group velocity, the velocity of the energy of the system. So it's defined by d omega dk, and in this particular case it's equal to p over m. So here you see that this definition of Vg is clearly related to the momentum p, because this in classical mechanics p equal mv, and you see that this is also true for a quantum free particle, p equal mvg. So this Vg has a physical meaning even in quantum mechanics. So another example is light, so photons. So you know that you probably know that omega equal kc in vacuum. So c is omega divided by k, and it's just a linear relationship. However, in a material, you do have some change. So omega c, the speed of a material, depends on the frequency. Okay, so in this case you do not have any more linear relationship, and this is why in particular you have decomposition of white lights in the spectrum here, because different wavelengths, different frequencies travel at different speeds and they bend. Let's here talk briefly about the phase velocity and the group velocity. These are things we will need soon. So this is how you can write a plane wave, and omega of k is called the dispersion relation. The phase velocity is omega divided by k. Group velocity is the derivative of omega with respect to k. And of course these are the two things, for example for light in vacuum, when omega equals ck. Right. And one thing is that is good to know, that we will use soon when we will talk about phonons, is that for a quantum excitation, we can also call that quasi-particles. So these are characterized by their energy, which is h bar omega in quantum mechanics, and their momentum, h bar k. So we have just seen before that p equal mv for a free quantum particle. So for a free particle in quantum mechanics we have this relationship, and so these can be used for any quasi-particles. This will include phonons. So K will have a special meaning. We will discuss this. Let's now look at this region, small k's. Okay, we can approximate this as a line, in fact. So if we have a line, it means Vg equal V phase. Okay, omega divided by k equal d omega dk. And this is corresponds to, in fact, the speed of sound. All right. So in fact, you can also see that this is a line by taking the approximation of the sign for small k. So if you take a Taylor expansion of the sign, you will just have a Ka divided by 2. And therefore, you will have this expression for omega. So omega equal Vk here. And this V is in fact the sound velocity. So here, small k's means very long wavelengths. So indeed, sound waves typically have from 2 cm to 20 meters, which is of course much greater than the lattice constant. And this is in fact the continuum limit when Ka is very small. So if the wavelength is much greater than the interatomic spacing, then the individual atoms will not be felt. The effect of the discrete atomic spacing is not felt. And this is called the continuum limit. So let's see what happens at k equals 0. How do the atom vibrate? So k equals 0, if we replace in the equation of the displacement, we just get the amplitude oscillating with time. So this is an oscillator. So this means there is no dependence on n. N is the position of the atoms. So all atoms move in phase the same way. So for example, in this way. So now what's going on at the Brillouin zone boundary? You know, that position where the dispersion relation is maximum. So at k equal pi over a. So again, we replace k by pi over a, and what we get is this. And plus, so exponential plus minus I n pi is in fact minus 1 to the power n. So what now we have dependence on n, but you see that each consecutive atoms will have a different sign. Therefore, they will move out of phase. Okay. Therefore, in this way. So this is a case of longitudinal wave, and this for a transverse wave. Alright, let's look again in more detail to this point, the Brillouin zone boundary. In fact, it's a maximum there, so the derivative d omega dk equals 0. And d omega dk is the group velocity, and the group velocity is the speed at which the energy is transported by the waves. Therefore, you don't have any propagation of energy at this point. And in fact, what kind of waves do not transport energy, do not travel? They are called standing waves. So we can see it here clearly. They move out of phase. All the atoms move out of phase. So this is clearly a standing wave. Also here, notice that the wavelengths corresponding to this. So this is k equal pi over a. Therefore, this leads to a wavelength of 2a. So here you can, it's easy to see that the wavelength is 2a, and this is the maximum wavelength in the Brillouin zone. Therefore the maximum, because it's repeating, it is a maximum wavelength that is physically interesting. So what about intermediate case between 0 and pi over a? This is what you could get for such an intermediate value of k. So let's now come back to the fact that the periodicity is that of the reciprocal lattice. Okay, this is a general principle. If your system is periodic in real space with a periodicity A, it will be periodic in a reciprocal space with 2 pi over a. Okay, so let's see what we can say about that. Let's first remind you about what is the first Brillouin zone. So this is a lattice in the reciprocal lattice. Okay, it is a reciprocal lattice. So in K space. So what we do to define the first Brillouin zone, in fact, you remember it is the Wigner-Seitz cell in the reciprocal lattice. So what we do is first we connect the nearest neighbors and we draw a line at midpoint and perpendicular to that black line. And we do that for all the nearest neighbors. And then we go to the second nearest neighbors, so these ones, and we do the same. We take this line perpendicular at midpoint for all the second nearest neighbors. And we could continue, and what we need is that our first Brillouin zone is the area that you get when you start from the central point and you go away and you meet the first red line that you meet in all directions. So in this case, this pink area is your first Brillouin zone. So in our case, here the first Brillouin zone, so this is one dimension, it's easy. First Brillouin zone is you take a point at midpoint here. So this is one reciprocal lattice point, this is another point, so the middle is here, the middle is here in this case. So this is your in one dimension, your first Brillouin zone. Therefore these are these pi over a points are the Brillouin zone boundary. And all we need is to characterize our system inside this first Brillouin zone, because our system is periodic. So now we can understand why we get standing waves actually at these points. Because you remember from the diffraction lectures that the surface of the Brillouin zone consists of the k vectors for which Bragg reflection occurs. So you have constructive interference from if you have a k vectors that correspond to these boundaries, at these boundaries, from 0 to here. So okay, so this is you can understand it in this way. In 1D here, you have one incident wave. It reflects at this point because we have Bragg reflections, right? So we know we have some reflections here. So we still have some waves coming in this way. Some are reflected. The same waves are reflected. So the sum of two waves going in opposite direction gives you a standing wave. All right. Therefore, that's why you get some standing waves at these points, and their wavelength is 2a. So in fact you could check that you get the Bragg formula for k vectors corresponding to the first Brillouin zone boundary. So we can do that. This is our chain separated by each atom separated by A. So this is our, we can say this is one unit cell. So we have an incident wave reflected at one site. So we have reflection here. Another part can be transmitted and reflected at another. It is reflected at another lattice site, like this. So of course, because these are elastic scattering, all the k prime, k second have the same amplitude. So what is the Bragg condition? So we will look at what you need to have constructive interference between this vector and this wave reflected and this one. So this will happen only if the optical path difference is n lambda, with n being an integer. All right, and this delta, so the path, the excess of path for this green wave is 1a plus another a, so that's 2a. Okay, so delta equal 2a equal n lambda. Therefore, lambda equal 2a divided by n. And k equal n pi divided by a. So we have our pi divided by a, which is the Brillouin zone boundary. Alright, so okay, let's look again at this point. This is k equal pi over a, and this leads to lambda equal to a. So this is the largest k vectors that we should look at, because we should look only at k vectors inside the first Brillouin zone. So this is the shortest wavelength we will have, and this is it makes sense when we look at this. This is the shortest wave we can get. So what about if we have if we take a k outside the first Brillouin zone? In this case, okay, k somewhere here, for example. In fact, this point is equivalent to this one, and we can go from this point to this one by subtracting a k vector equal to a reciprocal lattice vector. So we can always come back inside the Brillouin zone by subtracting or adding a reciprocal lattice vector. So indeed, waves with smaller wavelengths than 2a, therefore larger k's, have no meaning, because we can shift them back in the first Brillouin zone. So we are going to illustrate this with an example. Alright, so let's take this k, 2 pi divided by 10a. So this leads to this wave, so lambda equal 10a, so it's quite long. And this k is inside the first Brillouin zone. And these dots are the atoms. So let's take a k that is larger. So the same, we take the original k and we add one reciprocal lattice vector. So this is outside the Brillouin zone, the first Brillouin zone. So it's a larger k, therefore a smaller wavelength. So we get, in fact, this dashed curve. So we can clearly see it has a smaller wavelength. But in fact, again, what is important is only what is happening at the actual lattice sites. So only at these points. And you see that at these points, these two sine waves gives the same result. Therefore, they are equivalent, because we only look at the lattice sites. Right. Let's now look at chains a chain of 2 atoms per unit cell. So this is a 1 unit cell. You have 2 types of atoms, in this case 2 masses, so M1 and M2. And now we have to characterize the motion of these 2 masses. So let's say mass M1 will be characterized by UN, so this is the displacement compared to the equilibrium position, and the displacement of mass M2 will be Vn. Okay, so you can convince yourself that this distance will be this. So now B is the lattice constant, therefore it is the distance between the lattice points. Okay, and at each lattice point you have a basis consisting of M1 and M2. Alright, so again we apply Newton's law on M1 and then on M2, and we get in this case 2 equations. So we have UN but also Vn in each equation. So what are the solutions? So we've seen that for 1 atom per unit cell we were getting a wave actually. So actually in this case too we will have UN and Vn characterized by waves. So we can plane waves will be solutions of these 2 equations. So we can write the solutions as plane waves like this. So for UN and Vn. So again we have Kx. So x in this case will be again Nb, because these solutions are defined only at lattice points. So next we do the same thing as before. We take the solutions, we put them in these equations, and in this case we get 2 linear equations, the unknowns being u and v. So u and v are the amplitudes of these waves. They are not what we are interested in at this point. So these 2 equations are written again here. So we can write it as a system of 2 equations where the unknowns are the amplitudes u and v. So we can we know that this system will have some non-trivial solutions if the determinant written here is equal to 0. So this leads, when we calculate this determinant, this leads to an equation of omega as a function of k, which is written here. So here you notice that there are in fact 2 solutions for every k value, because we have here a plus or minus. So 2 dispersion relations. So these are known, we say we have 2 branches. So in this particular case, notice that this term here is the same as this one. So if k equals 0, this sign will be 0, and the square root will cancel the power of 2. So you see that for k equals 0, we will have either omega equals 0 when you have the minus here, or some value, a non-zero value, when this is a plus. So here is a plot of these solutions. So again it is omega as a function of k. So you notice that the first band here, that is called the acoustic band or acoustic branch, is very similar to the one we have got before for just 1 atom per unit cell. So the fact that we have here another atom in the unit cell has in fact added 1 branch here. So this one is called the optical branch. We'll see very soon why. And the interesting thing is that we have also here a band gap, frequency band gap. This means that there is no frequency in this range allowed in this system. So the waves with frequencies in this range cannot propagate in the crystal. So now the question is, how do the atoms move with respect to each other? For example, how do within one cell, how do mass M2 moves with respect to mass M1, and from one cell to another, how do they move? So how do M1 moves in one cell and the next, and same for M2. So to find out this, you have to do the same thing as we did probably with one atom per unit cell. So one atom per unit cell, you just look at un plus 1 divided by un, and you will get some information, at least at the critical points, like the center of the zone and the zone boundary here. So here you will have to look at the same un plus 1 divided by un. You will get information from two adjacent cells, and you can also look at within one cell. You can look at un divided by vn. This will give you an information on the relative motion of the two atoms in the unit cell. So I let this as an exercise. What you should find is that in the acoustic branch, the atoms move in phase. So the same as what we observed actually in the for the one atom per unit cell. So for example, it would be this. This would be the plus here is, let's say, M1, minus is M2. So they move together in the same direction, and here like that. Okay, so these are acoustic waves. So what about now the optical branch? So again, you could calculate, for example, U divided by V for k equals 0, and look how the atoms move here. So what you will find is that they move out of phase. So this can be represented like this. Of course, when this is for a transverse wave, so let's say this is a line of atom in equilibrium. So this one has moved this way, and the plus has moved the other way. So they move out of phase like a standing wave. So what is interesting, why is it called the optical branch? It's because these waves can couple with electromagnetic waves. So why is that? Especially in ionic crystals. So in ionic crystals you have ions, plus and minus, like represented here, plus, minus. And these atoms are, of course, they can sense the electric field, the electromagnetic field of an optical wave. So, for example, you can see that if there is an electric field, transverse, let's say, the minus charge will move one way and the plus charge will move another way. So, in fact, photons can be absorbed and their energy transferred to phonons, to optical phonons. So, optical vibrations that we call optical phonons. So, okay. So we have oscillating dipoles. This shows how the masses should oscillate. You can see that in the acoustic branch close to 0, they all move the same way. This is the same as one atom per unit cell. This is in fact here at the zone boundary. You have one mass is not moving and the others are moving out of phase. At this point you have the contrary, that mass not moving and the other are oscillating. And here at k equals 0 in the optical branch you have this behavior. So let's now generalize to p atoms per unit cell and also to three-dimensional crystals. So let's stay in 1D for now. So let's say we have p atoms per unit cell. In that case, we will have p branches. So we always get the acoustic, and the rest of the branches are optical. So one acoustic, p minus 1 optical. Alright, so now let's move to 3 dimensions. So we have 3 degrees of freedom for one atom. So in one direction we will have one longitudinal mode. So we represent this by an L. And 2 possibility of transverse modes, T. So to summarize, in 3D, p atoms per unit cell, you therefore have 3 p branches. So p branches multiplied by 3 modes. And you will have 3 acoustics, so 1 by 3, and 3p minus 3 optical modes. And of course, within the 3 you have 1 longitudinal and 2 transverse. So p minus 1 L, 2p minus 2 transverse optical. So this LA, you will see that often in books and in papers that you read for your research. For example, these are sometimes we talk about LO phonons, TO phonons, TA phonons, etc. So these are vibrational modes. So in one dimension, we have seen that it is enough to look at K values inside the first Brillouin zone. So the first Brillouin zone in 3 dimensions can be sometimes a bit complicated. For example, here you have this is a face-centered crystal, and this is the corresponding Brillouin zone. Okay, so we define some high symmetry points. The center of the cell is called the gamma. Then you have L is this direction, so gamma L. X is also a high symmetry point here, and K is a little bit less symmetric, but it's also an interesting point here, connecting these 2 points. So this is an example of bonds that can be calculated for this face-centered cubic crystal. So we represent, so the energy is the same as omega, because energy equal h bar omega, as a function of k in different directions. So gamma is here, for example, center, so this way will be the gamma x, that one. The gamma is also represented here. So in this direction you will have a gamma L direction, so this one. Okay, and this direction will be gamma k, in this direction. And these are for k vectors from the center of the cell to somewhere in between x and k. So there is a small animation that are from Hoffman. So we start from gamma point, so you can see the point here and here, and we get, so this point is here in the cell, and this point corresponds to this vector. Okay, continue now from this point here. This position corresponds to this one, x corresponds to this one. So let's look a little bit further. First, we notice that we have only acoustic branches because there is only 1 atom per primitive unit cell, so no optical branches. Second, we said there should be 3 branches in the acoustic branch: 1 transverse, 1 longitudinal, 2 transverse. But you see that in this direction, the gamma L, we have only 2. Gamma X also 2. So these are high symmetry directions. However, we have in the gamma K, we do have 3 branches. And gamma K is not very high symmetry. It is, but not as symmetric as the gamma X and gamma L. So in fact, what's going on is that because of the symmetry, the 2, for example, in the gamma X, here represented here, the 2 transverse are equivalent. Right, so they are represented here. This kind of motion and this kind of motion are equivalent. The two directions are completely equivalent, so they give the same result. And we say that the transverse phonons, transverse vibrations modes in the gamma X direction are degenerate. Okay, it's like in quantum mechanics, you have two states but they have the same energy. And this indeed is energy as a function of k, which will be a quantum number, as we will see later. This shows how the masses should oscillate. You can see that in the acoustic branch close to 0, they all move the same way. This is the same as 1 atom per unit cell. This is in fact here at the zone boundary. You have one mass is not moving and the others are moving out of phase. At this point you have the contrary, that mass not moving and the other are oscillating. And here let's now move to finite chain of atoms. So finite but very large, very long. So the question is, what are the boundary conditions? So what happens at the edges? So we are going to discuss this, and we will see that this raises some questions such as what k are allowed, and then the density of states. So the first idea that comes usually is to select fixed ends. So it's like a string. Here you have a string, and the string is fixed at the two ends. So this would mean that the atoms at the edges do not move. So this is already not satisfactory. Okay, the atoms not moving at the end. Okay, but we try to establish some models, so why not? We have to do something anyway. So we know the solutions for these boundaries. Sorry. So we have a discrete number of harmonics. So this is the first harmonic, or the fundamental. This is the second harmonic. So in fact the wavelength is equal to the length of this chain, and so on. The problem is this gives only standing waves. So why is it a problem? By definition, standing waves do not travel. And if we want to understand propagation of waves, we need to have traveling waves. Alright, for example, the transport of heat by vibrational waves requires that the energy will move. So here we have non-traveling waves. So this cannot be the solution. Nevertheless, let's look at what is coming out of this model. So this is we know that standing waves have can obey this kind of equation. So there is no kx minus omega t, no traveling. It's not a traveling wave, standing wave. So applying the boundary condition, that is no motion at x equals 0 and L, we have whatever the time is. So this means that this equals 0 whatever time, so this has to be equal to 0, which gives a condition on the k, on the possible k's, and therefore on the possible wavelengths. Alright, so this is not new to you, I am sure. So even this case is not very realistic, let's go through it to see what we can get. So the condition is this one, KL equal n pi. So in fact n is going from 1 to etc., but there is a maximum. Why? Because there is a maximum for k. Why? Because we said that we need only to look at the k vectors inside the first Brillouin zone. Alright, so we just need to look at from k equals 0 to k max, Kmax being the boundary, the Brillouin zone boundary. So let's find out S. So from this equation we get K equal n pi divided by L. Kmax is first Brillouin zone boundary is pi over A being the lattice constant. Okay, so equal to S pi over A, you replace n by S, and you get S equal L divided by A. So this, given that we have capital N atoms in the chain, how many, what is S? So in fact it is n minus 1, because this number is in fact the number of intervals between atoms, not the number of atoms. Alright, so this is what we get. So in fact there is a K equals 0 and the K equal K max, so all included we get a total allowed values of K of n. So here the same thing is explained. So I took this from the Kittel book. You may read this when you have time. It is exactly what I've explained. So they take the example here of, so S equal from 0 to 10. So this would be like 11 atoms, and so these are all the K possible values. All right. So we have seen that the fixed ends is not suitable because there is no traveling waves. So we need another kind of boundary condition, and Max Born and Theodor von Karman find an elegant one. So they say, in fact, let's say that the atom at one edge moves in the same way as the atom at the other edge. We have to find something. We are doing mathematics, we need some conditions. So why not these ones? And it could make some sense because these two edges, they are very far from each other. So in some sense they are kind of equivalent. So this could work, and it does because we actually use it, and it's used very widely for long systems. So in fact this is equivalent to say that we have a finite chain but with no end. That is because we say it's kind of periodic with period n, in fact. So we come back. We say that the motion of this atom at S equals 0 is the same as the nth atom. So it's like yes, a loop. All right. So in fact this boundary condition is quite elegant because it cancels the edges. Okay, because you connect them together, so they disappear. All right. So and in 2D, you will have to cancel the lines, the boundaries. So let's take this example. So you have periodicity in this direction and in this direction. So you will have to connect this one with this one, these two lines. So this will make a cylinder, actually. All right. And then you will have also to connect this line with this line. So you already have a cylinder. So you connect the two ends, the two openings of this cylinder, and you get what? A tor. All right. So this is what you get in 2 dimensions, actually. For a 2-dimension crystal, you will get a tor. So in 3 dimensions, you will have 4 dimensions actually, and it's not the time. So it's of course difficult to represent this in our brain, which is used to 3 dimensions for space. But in mathematics, it's no problem. You can always say apply the periodicity in this way. Alright, so let's see what this means in 1 dimension. We have so this is a periodicity condition. So we can write our plane wave like this. Time is not interesting, so we focus only on KAN here. So we can write this because of the UN plus n is equal to UN. So this is the same. We forget about the amplitudes. We only care about need to care about this part of the phase. So what does it mean? It means that the Ka capital N is equal to 1. Alright, for this to be true. So this gives us a condition on KNA. It has to be equal to an integer time 2 pi. Alright. So this restricts the possible values of k, like in the same way as when we were talking about standing waves, but in this case it's not about it's not standing waves. So we get discrete values of k's, 2 pi over an and this integer. So we have a discretization which has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. We are still dealing with here classical mechanics. So what is the maximum m here? In the previous slide we said k has can be taken only in the first Brillouin zone. So in fact from minus k pi over a to pi over a. We can also say that because of the periodicity, the function is periodic from k equals 0 to k equal to pi over a. So if we start from k equals 0 with m equals 0, then we have to go up to 2 pi over a, which is achieved when m is equal to capital N. But in fact, k equal 2 pi over a is the same as k equals 0, so we need to go just 1 less than n. Okay, so from 0 to n minus 1. Okay, because of the periodicity. So k from 0 to just 1 before 2 pi over a. So the interesting thing is that we have the number of k values in the first Brillouin zone, in fact, in one period, is equal to n, which is the number of mobile atoms. So we say the number of modes, k is associated to what we call a mode. So a same number of modes as the number of mobile atoms. So it's quite easy to remember. So this is what we get, in fact. So taking one atom per unit cell, we had these lines here, but now only a discrete set of k vectors are allowed. Okay, so this is the case for 10 atoms. Okay, so we have, let's start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This one is equivalent to this one. So we have here the 10, in this case, atoms gives 10 so-called normal modes of vibrations. So one thing is that the distance between the two adjacent k points is 2 pi over n a. So n, if n is very large, as it is the case usually, you see that still the distance between the points will be very small, so the points will be very dense and almost a continuum. So here we have again the same graph. So for one atom per unit cell and n unit cells, you will have just an acoustic branch and a set of k values given by this. So we have n gives you the number of k points, and you have one mode per k points. Now let's look at 2 atoms per unit cell and n unit cells. So we have also an optical branch. So in such a case, you will still have the k given by the same expression, and you will have nk points, but now you have 2 modes per k points. Okay, so let's take this k. You will have one mode here and another there. So let's see in 3 dimensions. In 1D, remember we have this up there. So let's consider a very simple case, a cubic crystal with elastic spacing A and side L with n unit cells in each direction. So we have this. So in such a case, the k's will be distributed as in 3 dimensions, ky, x, kz, in this way. So this is supposed to represent all the Newton's equations. All right, you have many indices in the equation of motion, so we don't need to go through this. You have all the directions, all the neighbors, etc. What is important here is that you will have 3, the number of solutions, 3 because of 1 longitudinal and 2 transverse. Then number of atoms per unit cell. Remember, 1 atom per unit cell, only acoustic branch. 2 atoms per unit cell, acoustic plus optical. And you add atoms, you will have other optical modes. So, and you have as many branches as a number of atoms per unit cell. So, and this is the k. For 1k, you will have all these solutions per k point. So in fact, it's written also here. So this is the number of solutions for every k point, the number of omega values for every k point in the Brillouin zone. And now you multiply by the unit cells, that is the number of cells. Okay, solution. So this is the n, capital N that we were using, n atom per unit cell, n cells, I mean, okay, will give you nk points in the Brillouin zone. All right. So this is a summary of when you have p atoms per unit cells. So the first part is here for infinite chains. So this is, we have been through this already. So you have p atoms per unit cell, you have 3 p branches, 3 acoustic and the rest optical, and 3 is 1L, L and 2T, you know, in both cases. And now we have seen that for finite crystals with n unit cell, for each k point you have, no, not for each k point, for each k point you have p solutions. You have the number of k values allowed in the Brillouin zone is n. Therefore, you have 3 n acoustic modes. Now these are modes. These here we are talking about branches. Here we are talking about modes. So okay, and of course 3p minus 3n optical modes. Alright, so this is all for vibrations of atoms in crystals. So next we are going to address the heat capacity. So heat capacity is how much energy you can store in a crystal when you rise the temperature by 1 degree. So the problem is that from what we have studied so far, we cannot answer this question accurately, because we don't know actually the amplitude of vibrations. We know the omegas, so omega of vibrations as a function of the k vectors, but we do not know how we do not have information on the amplitude of vibrations, therefore no information about the energy, how much energy is stored at some time at temperature T in the system, in these vibrations. So we need to find that. So we need to find a way to so that the vibrational amplitudes comes naturally out of the theory. And the classical mechanics does not allow this, so we will have to go quantum. So we will treat our oscillators as quantum mechanical oscillators, and we will keep some of the frequencies as they are in this what we have developed here, and this will solve the problem. So in part 2 we are going to look at the heat capacity, so the classical model, then the so-called Einstein model, and Einstein did not get the final answer, so we will have to look at another model which is known as the Debye model. Okay, see you in part 2. Thank you for your attention.